By the time Beeda and the girls reached the first joined lanes of Mercyreach, the sun had risen high enough to turn the wet leaves bright at their edges. The morning was no longer gray. Water shone in the joints of the stone path. Steam lifted from a roof where someone had opened a cooking vent. A pair of horses stood tied outside a repair shed, while a woman in a leather work apron leaned beneath the open side of a rugged utility machine and argued with a younger man about a wheel assembly. Farther down the lane, a narrow inspection crawler moved along a drainage edge with slow, jointed legs, pausing whenever its front feelers touched a blocked grate. Leya watched it for 6 steps before Beeda said, "Eyes on the path." "My eyes can do both." "Your knees cannot." Leya looked down just before her boot found a root ridge under the mud. She hopped over it and gave Beeda a look suggesting the warning had been unnecessary. Yasmin almost smiled. That was what Beeda had wanted, she realized. Not laughter exactly, not pretending the crow and hare were ordinary, or pretending henna was behind them instead of back at the holding with 2 sealed carriers and a report that could change who became involved. Beeda had wanted motion. Breakfast finished, school clothes on, satchels packed, path underfoot. One ordinary thing following another in the correct order. Yasmin listened to the lane as they walked. A hammer struck metal from inside a workshop. Then came the ring. A horse snorted before its handler soothed it. Then the low voice. A shutter banged when a gust caught it. Then someone swore and pulled it closed. Everything arrived after its cause. She hated that she had begun testing the world this way. "You're doing it again," Beeda said. Yasmin looked at her. "Doing what?" "Walking with your ears instead of your feet." "I can do both." Leya turned around at once. "That's what I said." "And both of you are wrong for the same reason," Beeda said. This time Yasmin did smile, although the feeling lasted until the lane widened. Mercyreach was busier here. The houses did not sit in neat rows. They stood where old trees, slopes, roots, and generations of repair had allowed them to stand. Timber walls built against older stone, small panes of practical glass, patched metal awnings, narrow covered bridges, work yards cut around trunks too large to remove. A rider passed them at a careful trot, one hand resting on a rolled tool bundle behind the saddle. 2 children in school clothes hurried across a side path with an older boy who carried 3 satchels and looked unhappy about all of them. A delivery machine crawled forward under a load of split timber, while a man beside it kept one palm on the frame and listened to the engine note. Nothing looked primitive. Nothing looked new enough to have forgotten where it lived. Mercyreach had grown by adding what worked and repairing what could still be made to work. Horses shared the lanes with motorbikes. Hand tools hung beside powered cutters. Rain chains emptied from roofs over buried conduits. Old stone steps had metal grip plates fixed into the places generations of boots had polished smooth. Yasmin had known all of this her whole life. This morning she noticed it because last night Merith had failed to know something. If an old man could say, "I do not know," and mean it, then every ordinary thing around her seemed suddenly more valuable. A woman carrying a basket of wrapped roots lifted 2 fingers to Beeda. "Morning." "Morning." "Girls off to Commons?" "Unless they escape before the pickup." "I only tried once," Leya said. The woman laughed and kept walking. That exchange helped more than Yasmin wanted to admit. At the next turning, the path widened around a retained cedar and split into 3 shallow approaches beneath a set of weather shelters. No bright sign announced a transport stop. The place did not need one. Families were already gathering there, some standing under timber and metal cover, others talking beside the stone edge. Children shifted satchels from shoulder to shoulder. A man checked the fastening on his daughter's boot. A young mother crouched to wipe mud from a boy's cheek and succeeded only in moving it to the other side. And under the far shelter, leaning with one shoulder against a post, as though she had been waiting long enough to make patience a personal insult, stood Kessa. Her blonde hair was loosely gathered back, with damp curls already escaping around her face. The dark olive-brown field study vest and pale underlayer marked the same learning house day as Yasmin's own clothes, though Kessa wore hers as if rules had been invented mainly to give her something to stand slightly sideways against. She saw Yasmin. Her expression changed at once. Not alarm, not suspicion. Recognition first, then curiosity. Kessa pushed away from the post and came toward them. "You look terrible," she said. Yasmin stopped. "Good morning to you too." "I meant tired, mostly." "That's much kinder. I can make it worse if you need consistency." Leya laughed before Yasmin could stop herself from doing the same. Kessa greeted Beeda, then looked back at Yasmin. The humor in her face remained, but her eyes stayed on Yasmin a fraction longer than usual. "Everything all right?" There it was. A simple question with too much room inside it. Yasmin could have told her about the crow that had forgotten the final certainty of death. She could have told her about the hare that had watched Henna approach, and then become something none of them could classify. She could have told her Merith had examined both, and had finally answered with 3 words that still seemed too large for the old man's mouth. She did not. Not because Kessa would laugh. That would have been easier. She did not because saying it aloud here, among wet satchels and impatient children and parents checking the road for the school transport, would pull the wrongness into this place too. "Dad had to take something for proper testing," Yasmin said. "That's all we know yet." Kessa's eyes narrowed slightly. "Something from yesterday?" "Yes," Beeda answered before the question could grow. "And when there is something real to tell, Henna will tell us. Until then, school is still school." Kessa nodded. She was curious enough to want more, and decent enough not to take it by force. "Fine," she said. "Then I am officially not asking." "You're going to ask later." "Obviously. I said not asking. I didn't say forever." From farther down the route came a low mechanical growl, steady and familiar, followed by the soft change in voices that moved through the waiting families when the Learning Commons transport turned onto the final approach. Leya stood on her toes. Beeda reached for the strap of her satchel and straightened it once. The ordinary morning had come to collect them. The Learning Commons transport came around the bend at a speed slow enough for children and heavy enough that the wet stones seemed to feel it. It was broad and high clearance, enclosed against Rootmere weather, with large practical windows set into a reinforced body. The panels did not match perfectly. One had been replaced and painted close to the older finish, without pretending the repair was invisible. Exposed reinforcement protected the lower edges. Oversized tires carried old mud in their treads, and the folding side steps lowered only after the vehicle had settled beside the shelter. No one in Mercyreach would have mistaken it for a ceremonial carriage. No one had built it to be admired from a distance. It was meant to carry children through rain, roots, broken stone, and years of repair, and bring them back with the same number it had taken. The side door opened. The operator leaned out, checked the shelter and the lane behind the vehicle, then lowered the steps fully. A second adult inside moved younger children toward the front benches, while older learning house students made room farther back. Satchels went beneath seats or into shallow storage rails where they would not become flying objects on a rough turn. "Foundation first," the attendant called. Leya immediately tried to become taller by standing very straight. "That does not make you older," Yasmin said. "It makes me easier to see, unfortunately." Leya stepped forward with the younger group. Beeda caught the back of her vest before she reached the first step. "What?" "Goodbye." "Oh." Leya turned and threw both arms around Beeda's waist with the sudden, total commitment of a child who had nearly forgotten affection because boarding a large vehicle was more interesting. Beeda bent, kissed the top of her head, and checked the satchel strap a final time. "Stay with your house. Listen the first time." "I always listen." Yasmin and Kessa made the same sound at once. Leya glared at both of them, climbed the folding steps, and turned from the doorway. "I did not need help." "No one said you did," Beeda replied. That satisfied her. She disappeared toward the forward benches. Kessa moved onto the first step, then looked back at Yasmin. "Coming?" Yasmin did not move yet. Beeda had not asked her to stay. That almost made leaving harder. For one foolish second, she pictured the holding exactly as she had last seen it. Henna by the carriers, Ashgard between him and the house, the field house door open behind them. She imagined the research road beginning without her. She imagined an answer arriving while she sat at a work table, pretending to care about measurements or reading. Then she remembered what Henna had promised. He would tell her exactly what they said, even if what they said was useless, especially then. Beeda touched her shoulder. "You do not have to solve it before you leave the pickup shelter." Yasmin lowered her voice. "What if something changes while we're gone?" "Then your father records it. If it is dangerous, he acts. If he learns something, he tells us. And if he learns nothing, then he tells us that too." The answer was so much like Henna's that Yasmin looked at her. Beeda's mouth shifted. "You think only one of us knows him?" Kessa, still waiting on the step, deliberately turned her face toward the vehicle interior, as though she had not heard the private part of the conversation. Yasmin noticed that too. "All right," Yasmin said. Beeda's hand tightened once on her shoulder and released. Kessa climbed inside. Yasmin followed. Before she crossed the threshold, Leya's face reappeared between two seatbacks. "Mama?" "Yes?" "If Dad finds out the thing is fine, you tell me first." Beeda understood the missing word and did not supply it. "If there is something safe and real to tell, you will hear it from us." "Before Yasmin?" "No promises that foolish." Leya accepted this injustice with visible disappointment. Kessa glanced at Yasmin. Yasmin shook her head once. "Not here." Kessa did not ask. That small act of restraint felt like a gift. Inside, the vehicle smelled of damp cloth, old timber sealant, metal warmed by use, and the faint, clean bite of whatever the transport crew used on the floor after muddy days. The benches were built for movement rather than comfort. Younger children settled toward the front where the adult attendant could reach them quickly. The older students filled the rear in uneven clusters defined by friendship, habit, and whoever had arrived early enough to claim the window. Kessa had saved Yasmin a place. "I was going to make you sit beside the loudest person on this vehicle if you were late," she said. Cruel. Corrective. Yasmin slid into the seat and put her satchel between her boots. Through the window, Beeda remained beside the shelter. She was not waving frantically. She was not trying to hold them there with her face. She stood with one hand resting against the strap of her own bag, watching both daughters in the ordinary way mothers watch children leave for a day they fully expected to end. That mattered. The door folded shut. The operator checked the lane again. The engine note deepened. Only then did the vehicle begin to move. Cause, then sound. Decision, then motion. Yasmin hated that she noticed. Kessa leaned close enough that only Yasmin could hear her. "I am still officially not asking." "Thank you. But you owe me something less terrible to talk about." Yasmin looked through the wide window as the shelter slid behind them, and Beeda became smaller between the retained trees. "Fine," she said. "Pick something ordinary." Kessa smiled. Mercyreach began moving around them. Kessa's idea of ordinary turned out to include a dispute about whether a field observation still counted if the observer had forgotten to record the weather. "It was raining," she said. "Everyone knew it was raining." "Then writing it down should have been easy." "That is not the point." "That sounds exactly like the point." Across the aisle, Leya had found another Foundation House child willing to compare the contents of their lunch wraps in whispers. Every few moments she looked back to make sure Yasmin still existed, then returned to the more urgent matter of deciding whose packed fruit was larger. The transport rolled deeper into Mercyreach. From the holding, the settlement could seem like scattered homes under too much forest. From inside the moving vehicle, it revealed itself in layers. The first lanes remained narrow and root-lifted. Houses stood apart, joined by paths, covered walks, and small workyards. A horse cart waited while two motorbikes passed in the opposite direction, both riders slowing for the school vehicle before accelerating again. One bike carried a coil of repaired conduit. The other had a narrow tool case fixed behind the rider. Then the buildings gathered closer. Workshops opened toward the road. A glass-fronted room held 3 people bent over a long machine housing, while an older woman outside checked a row of fitted components against a handwritten list. A compact utility crawler dragged a branch bundle toward a fuel yard. 2 mechanics stood beside a broad-tired service vehicle with one wheel removed, arguing with their hands as much as their voices. Above them, rainwater channels ran along timber beams into a stone catchment wall laced with newer metal pipe. Kessa tapped the window with one finger. That one's still there. Yasmin followed her gaze. What? The wheel. Which wheel? Exactly. They took the machine apart 2 days ago. I think the wheel has become a permanent resident. Yasmin laughed. For several seconds, she forgot to listen for anything arriving early. That frightened her almost as much as remembering. The transport crossed a reinforced bridge where the ground fell away into a drainage cut dark with ferns and water. The suspension took the uneven join with a low shift through the floor. Children swayed together, corrected without thinking, and went on talking. No one gasped. No one treated the machine as extraordinary. It was only the way they got to school. Beyond the bridge, Mercyreach became denser again. Farwatch influence showed itself without banners. There were larger equipment yards, racks built for travel gear, covered maintenance bays, horses trained to stand beside running engines, and people who moved through the morning with packs already strapped for work beyond ordinary household paths. A woman with cropped silver hair crossed the lane carrying a folded climbing frame over one shoulder. A broad-shouldered man in a patched raincoat guided 2 pack animals past a service bay. A younger technician knelt beside a low robotic unit and replaced a mud-clogged joint seal while the machine held perfectly still. Yasmin noticed that too, for a different reason. Farwatch had never been one kind of person. It was easy, from home, to make her father into the shape of the whole service, because he was the part she knew best. Out here she could see again how many different lives fed into the same roads. "Where did you go?" Kessa asked. Yasmin turned. "I'm here." "Your face left." "My face is still attached. Physically." Yasmin looked out the window again. She could tell Kessa wanted to ask about henna. That was safer than asking about the animals, and therefore, somehow, harder. "He has to take the specimens farther in," Yasmin said at last. Kessa waited. Yasmin chose each word. Marith couldn't explain them. So Dad is sending them to people with proper instruments. "Specimens," Kessa repeated. "Animals?" Yasmin's stomach tightened. She could still stop. "Yes, sick animals?" "We don't know." That was the truth. Not the whole truth. A bounded truth, the kind henna used when facts had not earned a larger claim. Kessa studied her for another moment. "And that's why you look like you haven't slept?" "Partly. What's the other part?" Yasmin looked at her. Kessa raised both hands. Officially not asking. "I remember." The transport turned onto a broader stone and packed earth lane where school-bound traffic began to separate from workshop traffic. Retained trees still broke the route, but the paths were wider, the drainage cleaner, and the maintenance more deliberate. Children on foot joined from side paths. Another communal vehicle crossed ahead, and disappeared behind a stand of cedar. A group of older learners walked under a covered way, carrying rolled boards and tool satchels. The learning commons did not rise as one large building. It appeared first as a pattern. Gardens tucked between old trees, timber arches spanning paths, long windows under repaired roofs, covered walks connecting separate halls, stone yards built for work instead of ceremony. Newer structural supports set into older frames where age or weather had demanded them. The campus seemed to have grown the same way Mercyreach had, by keeping what still served and adding what the next generation needed. Leya spotted it before Yasmin said anything. "We're here!" The younger children at the front began gathering satchels, despite the attendant telling them twice to remain seated until the vehicle stopped. Kessa leaned toward the window. "Foundation side first." Leya looked back with sudden seriousness. "You'll come get me later?" "We leave from the same campus," Yasmin said. "That is not what I asked." "Yes, I'll come get you if I'm allowed." Leya nodded, satisfied. The transport slowed. Its tires rolled from the main lane onto the Learning Commons receiving path. The engine changed note. The children quieted by degrees, not because anyone commanded them to, but because arrival created its own order. Yasmin looked through the window at the familiar covered walks and thought, with a force that surprised her, "Let this stay ordinary. Just this. For one morning." Henna waited until his family was out of sight before he went back to the field house. Not because the work had changed, because watching them leave had been part of the work. The formal report lay where he had left it, weighted at one corner against the morning draft. The two carriers remained sealed and separate on their receiving surfaces. Ashgard sat near the doorway, broad black body still, ears moving between Henna and the property lane. "Stay," Henna said. The wolf did not need the command repeated. Henna finished the last report entry before he touched either carrier. Time found. Place found. Who had handled each animal? What had been observed before movement? What had not been observed? What Merith had checked? What Beeda had checked? No wound he could identify. No ordinary predator sign. No confirmed breach. No claim about cause. The temptation in a strange report was to make it sound important enough that no one could ignore it. Henna had learned the opposite. Write only what would survive being questioned by someone who had not been there. He signed off the field account, closed it, and stepped outside to the Farwatch field bike. The machine stood ready. Heavy, reinforced frame, broad tires, long travel suspension, protective tubing around vulnerable assemblies, practical controls, and modular cargo mounts built for equipment that had to arrive in the same state it left. Nothing about it was elegant. It was fast because it could keep moving over roads that broke lesser machines. Henna checked the front tire, rear tire, suspension travel, visible fasteners, control response, and the load frame before starting the engine. Then he shut it off again. Evidence first. The crow carrier went into one protected cargo position. The hare carrier went into the other. Separate mounts, separate straps, same height. Enough space between them that a hard turn, rut, or suspension compression could not make one strike the other. He tightened each restraint, pressed down on each carrier, checked the covers, and then pulled against the load in the direction the road would try to move it. Neither shifted. He checked again. Only then did he start the bike. The engine settled into a low mechanical note. Ashgard rose. "Stay with the holding." The wolf looked toward the Mercyreach ward lane where Beeda and the girls had gone, then back at Henna. He sat. Henna mounted with his head and face uncovered. Aaron's iron fire remained secured at the holding. The two carriers fixed behind him mattered more than anything else in his load. He eased onto the lane. For the first stretch, his route overlapped the roads the family had taken earlier. Mercyreach was fully awake now. He passed a stable yard where a girl was walking a nervous horse past a running utility engine until the animal stopped flinching at the sound. He slowed for 3 children crossing under the supervision of an elderly man with a cane. A repair crew had opened one side of the lane to reach a buried service line, forcing riders, bikes, and a timber hauler into a patient single-file negotiation around the work. Henna did not use the bike's speed where speed would only move risk from him to someone else. When the local lanes finally opened, he let the machine run. The broad tires found grip on wet stone, packed earth, and root-broken joints. The suspension worked beneath him rather than throwing every impact into the cargo frame. Wind pressed against his coat. The carriers remained exactly where he had fixed them. Mercyreach thinned behind him by degrees. The route toward institutional Rootmere was not empty country. It was connection. Maintained ground roads, drainage cuts, reinforced crossings, service points, water channels, power and communication runs protected where the terrain allowed, work compounds set back from the road, homes and smaller districts appearing where the stoneward ring's interior geography made settlement practical. The farther he rode, the more often old forest and engineered infrastructure shared the same view. A stone retaining wall held a slope beneath trees older than the wall. A repaired metal bridge crossed a ravine whose water had probably cut the rock long before Rootmere had a name. A horse patrol moved along a parallel track, while a rugged utility carrier followed the main route below. At one junction, a mechanic waved Henna through, before rolling a broad-tired freight machine across the lane. Everything moving through this stretch of Rootmere stayed close to the land: road, track, bridge, and service lane, all of them carrying the weight of ordinary work. Henna rode for long enough that the journey stopped feeling like movement between 2 neighboring communities and began to feel like what it was: a crossing through a civilization hidden inside the same mountains his daughters had grown up seeing as a boundary. He thought of Yasmin believing, as children did, that because she could walk from home to Mercyreach, she understood the size of the hollow. He had once believed the same thing. The route climbed. At a broad shoulder of stone, the trees opened enough for the inner valley to show itself. Henna slowed without stopping. Rootmere spread below in pieces too large to take in at once. Residential districts lay among retained forest bands. Civic structures occupied broad terraces. Waterworks traced lower ground. Market lanes and service roads crossed between denser clusters. Medical and research compounds showed cleaner materials among older stone and timber. Learning grounds occupied another band of the valley, connected by roads rather than gathered into a single center. Horses moved on some routes. Bikes and rugged ground vehicles moved on others. The stoneward ring rose around all of it. 18,000 lives, give or take, depending on births, deaths, travel, and who was counted where. Henna did not know whether the number helped. If the animals were an isolated wrongness, then distance mattered. If they were not, the number mattered more. He kept riding. Institutional Rootmere gathered gradually ahead, rather than appearing as a shining city. The roads broadened. Drainage and service access became more deliberate. Buildings sat closer together, but old stone remained under newer reinforcement. Clean examination structures stood beside darker materials buildings. Planted courts broke up the density. Repair lanes remained visible. Nothing had been built to pretend maintenance was beneath the people who depended on it. Henna turned toward the research district. He did not know the formal answer he was bringing them because there was no formal answer yet. He had 2 animals. He had a sequence of observations. He had a 100-year-old man willing to say he did not know. That was enough to open the door. At the receiving approach, he reduced speed, entered the practical service lane, and stopped the field bike where incoming work could be handled without blocking other traffic. He shut down the engine. The sudden quiet made the carriers seem louder than they were. Henna dismounted and checked both mounts before he unfastened anything. Crow, secure. Hare, secure. Same covers, same positions. No impact, no shift. The road had changed around them. The evidence had not. That was the point. While Henna was still on the longer road toward institutional Rootmere, the Learning Commons transport reached the campus. The vehicle rolled beneath a timber and metal receiving arch and into the arrival courtyard at walking speed. Its broad tires passed from the approach lane onto flatter stone, then stopped beside a covered edge where several adults were already positioned to receive the younger children. The door opened. This time, the attendant did not have to say, "Foundation first." The 6- and 7-year-olds were already trying to become a single moving object. "Sit," the attendant said. They sat with the wounded dignity of people whose plan had been betrayed. Leya looked back at Yasmin. "Now?" "Now." The younger group descended under supervision. Leya made it to the courtyard, remembered something, turned and ran 2 steps back toward the vehicle before an adult redirected her with one hand. "Yasmin!" Yasmin leaned toward the open door. "What?" "You said you'd come get me." "If I'm allowed." "That part is unnecessary. Go." Leya grinned and hurried after the Foundation House group. The younger children moved along a direct stone path between retained trees and low garden beds toward a separate house built to their scale. Broad sheltered entry, warm timber, child height storage, windows low enough to see through without climbing anything. Nothing about it resembled the learning house spaces meant for older students. Yasmin watched until Leya disappeared inside. "She'll survive," Kessa said. "That's what she keeps telling us. She's very convincing." The older students began unloading. The courtyard was not a ceremonial square. It was a working hinge between paths. Covered walks led toward the learning house and other campus buildings. Gardens occupied the spaces trees had not claimed. Stone channels carried last night's rain away from the busiest routes. A maintenance worker had one panel open beneath a weather shelter and was replacing a dull metal fitting while students flowed around him without interest. Kessa jumped down, slung her satchel across her body, and waited for Yasmin. Yasmin followed more slowly. The morning smelled of wet bark, paper carried under coats, metal, soil, and the faint, warm oil scent from the transport as it idled before continuing to another stop. "There you are," a woman's voice said. Kessa turned. "Morning, Seren." Seren Maris stood near the learning house path with a small book tucked against one side and her satchel crossing the long, muted green-gray coat she wore for work. Her dark hair was gathered securely back, though the damp air had freed a few strands around her face. She was not standing like someone waiting to catch students doing something wrong. She was watching the whole courtyard at once. A younger learning house student nearly backed into a wheel track while arguing with a friend. Seren lifted 2 fingers. "Path." The student corrected course without breaking the argument. Serene looked back at Kessa and Yasmin. "You're on time." Kessa placed a hand over her heart. "I would like that recorded. It has happened before. Unproven." Serene's gaze moved to Yasmin. Not sharp, not suspicious. Attentive. "Morning, Yasmin." "Morning." "Wet road?" "Only where the road exists." Kessa made a sound that might have been a laugh. Serene's mouth almost moved. "Then the road remains consistent. Inside when you're ready." She turned to help guide another group through the covered walk. That was all. No one asked why Yasmin looked tired. No one told her she was being watched. No one mentioned dead birds, motionless hares, Marith, Far Watch reports, research routes, or the feeling that sometimes the world reached her before it reached itself. The relief was so immediate she almost resented it. Kessa bumped her shoulder lightly. "See? Ordinary." Yasmin looked toward the learning house. Old timber arches framed broad windows. Newer supports and useful technical systems had been fitted where they were needed, without turning the building into something separate from Mercyreach. Through the open doorway, she could see movable work tables, racks for wet coats, shelves of paper and field materials, dull, clean metal built into older wood. "You said that like you're proving something," Yasmin said. Kessa's expression softened. "Maybe I am." They went inside. The room was already filling with the sounds of a normal morning. Chairs shifting, paper opening, someone trying to borrow a tool without admitting they had forgotten theirs, an educator telling two students to stop blocking the aisle while continuing a conversation with a third. Yasmin put her satchel down. Nothing happened before she touched the table. A chair scraped only after someone moved it. A book fell only after an elbow knocked it from a stack. A voice called Kessa's name only after the speaker drew breath. Yasmin closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, Kessa was watching. "Still here?" Kessa asked. "Still here." "Good. I hate doing all the thinking myself." Yasmin sat beside her. Outside, the transport pulled away from the courtyard. Foundation House settled into its younger rhythm. Serene moved through the learning house with the quiet attention of an adult whose job was to notice problems before they became injuries. For now, there was no problem for her to notice. The school morning began. By the time Yasmin had settled into the first ordinary work of the learning house morning, Henna was walking the two carriers into institutional custody. He moved the crow first. The field bike remained in the receiving lane behind him, engine off, the hare still fixed in its separate, protected mount. Henna carried the crow container with both hands to the intake threshold, set it onto the first waiting surface, and stepped back before returning for the second. The hare came next. Separate carriers, separate surfaces, no contact between them. The intake area was cleaner than the field house without being sterile enough to feel unreal. White and cream working surfaces had been fitted into an older stone structure. Clear partitions separated handling zones. Service panels and conduits were accessible rather than hidden behind decorative walls. Two receiving trays stood far enough apart that staff could work around either specimen without crossing equipment. An intake worker checked the carrier covers before asking Henna to remove them. "You sealed these?" "I secured them for travel. They were contained earlier at the holding." "Opened after Merith examined them?" "No." "Anyone treat either animal?" "No medicine, no cut, no burn, nothing introduced." The worker looked up. "You are certain?" "Beeda saw them before transfer. Merith examined them. We treated both as evidence from the beginning." That answer changed the pace of the room. Not faster, more exact. A second staff member brought the intake record close enough for Henna to verify the field summary, while the first worker continued the chain of questions. "Found together?" "Same broader incident span, not the same position." "Both inside Rootmere?" "Yes." "External expedition exposure?" "Not established." "Known chemical or machine contact?" "None observed." "Predator event?" "No ordinary sign." "Projectile? Impact?" "No wound or strike evidence we could identify." "Disease cluster?" "Not established." "Other animals affected?" Henna kept the answer where the evidence ended. "Not in the report I brought." The worker studied him, perhaps expecting the kind of Farwatch officer who would fill a silence with a theory. Henna did not. The cover came off the crow first. The bird looked as it had looked at the holding, black feathers intact, body still, one eye open without tracking the people around it. Nothing on its surface declared what Merith had failed to name. It looked ordinary until someone tried to decide what state it was actually in. The hare remained covered until the crow's receiving check was complete. Then its carrier was opened on the second surface. It too remained still. One worker watched for movement while the other read back the handling sequence. No one leaned close enough to turn caution into carelessness. "Breathing?" the intake worker asked. "Not confirmed when I left the holding." "Was it confirmed earlier?" Henna nodded. "Earlier in the sequence, yes. Later, no." The worker did not write alive, did not write dead. That restraint earned some of Henna's trust. Temperature. Inconsistent observations before transfer. I will not give you a number I did not measure with your equipment. The worker's eyes lifted again. Good. Henna had not come this far to make another person's instrument agree with a memory. They checked the carriers themselves next. No visible damage from travel, no opened restraint, no evidence that one specimen had contacted the other. Henna confirmed the field bike mounts had remained separate throughout the ride. The intake staff recorded the route and the fact of secure transport without turning either into an explanation. Then came the problem of where to send the case. One worker stood with both hands on the edge of the central surface and looked from crow to hare. If we call this wildlife mortality, the hare complicates it. If we call it exposure, the other said, we still don't know exposure to what. Toxin? Possible until tested. Disease? Possible. Contamination? Possible. The first worker looked at Henna. Farwatch concern? This was where a dramatic answer could have moved the case faster. Henna refused it. My concern is that two animals presented states we could not classify locally. Merith could not explain them. That justifies formal examination. It does not prove a breach. Nothing at Ironward? Nothing in my evidence says Ironward was breached. The room stayed quiet for a beat. The worker nodded. Biology first. That was the responsible choice. Not because biology was certain to answer the question, but because animals were bodies before they were theories. The intake record changed status. Family custody and Farwatch transport were complete. Institutional receiving assumed control of the two specimens under the separation conditions Henna had maintained from the holding. The transition was physically simple. One staff member took responsibility for the crow tray. Another took responsibility for the hare tray. Henna no longer touched either carrier. That mattered more than a signature. The evidence had changed hands. He stayed with it. The trays moved through a controlled internal route from intake toward a smaller examination room. Older stone gave way to cleaner cream surfaces and practical observation glass. The equipment became more specialized without becoming more impressive for its own sake. Compact instruments sat where a person could reach and service them. Nothing glowed for atmosphere. Nothing announced an answer before one existed. At the laboratory threshold, a lean, middle-aged man in a worn cream research coat looked up from a notebook. Round wire-frame glasses caught the room light. Long, dark hair had been pushed back without much success at keeping it there. His beard showed the natural unevenness of age rather than careful presentation. He looked first at the trays, then at Henna. "You're the path captain who brought them?" "Henna Valmara." The researcher set the notebook down. "Edrin Morvale. Tell me what you observed, not what you think it means." Henna understood immediately why the case had been sent to him. Edrin Morvale did not begin by asking whether the animals were impossible. He began by asking whether they were contaminated. The distinction made Henna trust him more. Edrin checked the intake record, then the seals, then the physical state of each carrier before anyone moved the specimens. His long face tightened behind the round glasses when he reached the line describing the hare's earlier breathing and the later failure to confirm it, but he did not comment until he had finished reading. "You kept them separate from discovery onward?" "Once contained, yes." "No shared cloth, water, tools?" "No." "Your wife examined them?" Beeda is trained as a healer. She checked what she could without damaging evidence. "And Merith?" "Same restraint." No treatment. None. Idrin nodded once. Good. Then we start with the boring possibilities. Henna glanced at the crow. I would be grateful for boring. Everyone says that after they bring me something interesting. There was no humor in Idrin's face, but the line sounded practiced enough that Henna suspected it had once contained some. The crow was examined first, without cutting or opening it. Idrin worked from the outside in, beginning with the observations least likely to change the specimen: visible trauma, feather condition, eye response, surface signs, joint position, evidence of fluid, contamination, or residue. He used compact instruments only after his own inspection had established what he expected each tool to answer. Henna watched the method more than the equipment. Idrin never took a reading and immediately gave it meaning. He compared it to the body in front of him, then to another reading, then back to the first. When two pieces of information failed to sit comfortably together, he did not call the mismatch mysterious. He called it a reason to check the instrument. Tell me again where the bird was found. Henna did. Position when first seen? Henna described it. Any movement? None I observed. Anyone report movement before you? No. Sound? No. Contact with a machine? None observed. Idrin wrote only after Henna finished. The hare came next. The intake staff moved it on its own tray. The crow remained separate. Idrin changed the contact materials he needed changed, cleaned what had to be cleaned, and started the examination sequence again, rather than treating the second animal as an extension of the first. The hare's body remained still. Idrin watched its ribs, throat, and nostrils long enough that Henna began to count the seconds with him. No reliable movement presented itself. Idrin watched longer than Henna expected before moving on. You saw respiration earlier? Yes. With your own eyes? Yes. Not your daughter reporting it. My own eyes. And later you could not confirm it. Correct. How much later? Henna gave the sequence as accurately as he could, without manufacturing a precision he had not recorded. Idrin accepted that too. Then the instruments began disagreeing with what a simple classification should have allowed. At first, the disagreement was small enough to be ordinary. A contact might be poor, a sensor might be drifting, a calibration reference might be old. Moisture on fur or feather might alter one measurement. The specimen might have cooled unevenly during transport. A handling surface might be influencing the result. A tool could simply be wrong. Idrin named those possibilities aloud, not for Henna's benefit, but because saying them forced the room to respect them. First result is not a result, he said. It is a question about the instrument. He set the first tool aside. Henna folded his arms and waited. Idrin brought out the calibration reference, checked the instrument against something whose expected response was already known, adjusted it, ran the reference again, and watched until the reading stabilized where it should. Then he repeated the check before returning to the specimen. The instrument behaved. The crow did not become easier. Idrin's brow tightened. He repeated the sequence. Same problem. He moved to the hare. Same class of disagreement. Not identical numbers. Not a neat matching pattern that could be turned into a story. Something worse for a careful researcher. Two separate bodies producing results that remained internally difficult to reconcile after the obvious equipment objection had been addressed. Idrin took off his glasses, cleaned them although they were not dirty, and put them back on. Again, he said. Henna had heard Marith say the same word the night before. The old man had repeated his examination because experience had failed him. Idrin repeated his because instruments could fail. Different roads. Same refusal to guess. A second calibration followed. Idrin checked the reference, checked the contact surfaces, changed the position of the probe, repeated the reference, repeated the animal measurement. Then, he used a second available instrument to test whether the first device was creating the contradiction by itself. He did not hurry. That was the hardest part to watch. Henna had crossed Rootmere because he wanted better tools, but better tools did not make time move faster. They made uncertainty more disciplined. Could transport do this? Edrin asked. Do what? Create the condition we're measuring. Henna considered before answering. The carriers stayed separate and secure. No impact I recorded. If transport changed them, I did not observe when or how. Good answer. It is the only one I have. Edrin looked at the hare again. Disease is still on the table. Toxin is still on the table. Contamination. Unknown exposure. A condition we have not classified before. I am not removing ordinary causes because I dislike the data. But equipment error is becoming a worse explanation. The words settled differently from Marith's uncertainty. Marith had reached the boundary of what he could recognize by experience. Edrin was building a boundary around what he could trust by repetition. Henna looked through the observation glass at the two separate trays. Are they dead? Edrin did not answer quickly. That delay told Henna more than a confident answer would have. I can tell you that neither specimen is presenting a biological state I am willing to name from this first examination, Edrin said. If I call them dead, I ignore measurements I have now reproduced. If I call them alive, I ignore other findings that are just as real. Henna felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. So Marith was right. Marith said he did not know. That remains a respectable position. Edrin returned to the instruments. He ran the calibration reference again. Correct. He repeated the crow measurement. It failed to reconcile in the same way it had before. He repeated the hare. The contradiction remained. The room remained stubbornly ordinary looking. Nothing about the animals changed enough for an untrained eye to see what the instruments were refusing to reconcile. That made the result harder, not easier. A spectacular failure could have been dismissed as a broken machine. This was quieter. The equipment behaved when tested. The evidence did not become ordinary when measured again. Edrin closed the notebook, then opened it immediately and added one more line. I want the next review broadened, he said. Biology first was correct. Biology alone is not enough. To what? I will decide the next discipline after I finish documenting what I can defend, not before. Henna nodded. He could work with that. Outside the laboratory, Rootmere continued its morning. Children were already in their houses. Workshops were open. Horses moved on wet roads. Machines carried timber, tools, people, and messages from one district to another. Somewhere in Mercyreach, Beeda was trusting Henna to bring back fact instead of fear. Somewhere inside the learning house, Yasmin was trying to make an ordinary day hold. Henna had wanted the research institution to reduce the mystery. Instead, competence had given the mystery stronger bones. The instruments were recalibrated. The checks were repeated. The biological results survived recalibration. They still made no sense.